Have you ever seen a man who has everything kneel on the same ground where he lost what mattered most? Eric Thompson could buy planes, hotels, entire cities, but there, in that train station that no one remembers anymore, he was on his knees, in front of dozens of cameras, 10 security guards, whispering reporters. No fortune can protect a heart that bleeds for the past. And there Charlotte was, standing just a few feet away from him, unsure whether to run away again or listen to what his silence had been screaming for 30 years. The wind ruffled Eric's impeccable coat, but there was no pride left inside him. There was guilt, and a love that no bank account could bury. 30 years building glass buildings, million-dollar contracts, private parties for the select few. 30 years without a word to Charlotte, but also without a peaceful night's sleep. The tycoon who dictated orders to presidents now begged for a look of forgiveness. Charlotte, so simple, so real, lightly dressed, her hair loose as before, her gaze still carrying the pain of someone who had been left on the invisible altar of a cold platform. While everyone recorded that historic scene, for her there was only the memory of the boy who swore to run away with her, and who exchanged her for a surname as heavy as a safe. There, on that cracked concrete, were exposed the weight of regret, the strength of a broken promise, and the courage that arrives late, but arrives. Eric took a deep breath, ignored the flashes, and let each word come out like a knife, cutting through the armor he had built up over 3 decades. Charlotte, I spent millions trying to forget what I did to you. I couldn't. I'm not going to die owing you that forgiveness. A whisper ran through the crowd. Some held back tears, others doubted the scandal. But for Eric, nothing mattered but her. And for Charlotte, there was no going back to who she was before that train left without him. As the new train arrived, whistling like a clock that laughs at human haste, Eric remained kneeling, vulnerable, a millionaire on the outside, miserable on the inside. Charlotte took a deep breath. She knew that there, in front of that entire curious city, the past was demanding passage. And not all the gold in the world could buy her next words. Charlotte didn't say anything right away. Her silence was louder than all the camera clicks. The crowd, curious, stopped to watch not the fall of a millionaire, but the rebirth of an ordinary man, on his knees before the love he had tried to bury his entire life. There, on that platform that had witnessed promises and farewells, the past and the present faced each other. And those who were nearby felt it. Stories like these never fade, no matter how much time passes. Eric, his hands shaking, waited for an answer. Charlotte, her heart beating where before there was only pain, understood that some scars do not heal on their own. And that is why stories of reunion move so much to those who still believe in true love, because everyone carries a hidden what if. Everyone dreams of having a second chance, even when they think it is too late. It is because of stories like Charlotte and Eric's that this channel exists, to prove that love does not die with time. To remind people that forgiveness can heal what all the money in the world cannot. And for those who feel this throbbing inside their chest, each video is an invitation to relive what seems impossible, a love that survives silence, distance, pride, and wrong decisions. Like this video now if any part touched your heart. This simple gesture shows that it is still worth telling stories that no one else has the courage to tell. And subscribe to the channel to be part of each new reunion, each new confession, each new beginning that destiny still has in store for those who have not lost faith in what really matters. Here, each like keeps alive this mission of remembering that, in the end, what separates people is smaller than what can bring them together again. And while Eric waits for a word, Charlotte holds her breath, because her next sentence could change everything. And those who feel it, follow it until the end. The wind that blew through the station seemed to mock Eric Thompson. There, kneeling, the man the entire city had learned to fear revealed a face that almost no one knew. To the magazine covers, he was the tycoon who transformed abandoned lots into glass skyscrapers, the businessman who grew the Thompson family fortune while unblinkingly toppling rivals. But to him, each accumulated figure was just cement covering a hole that no one saw, the void Charlotte left when she boarded that train alone 30 years ago. As a young man, Eric carried on his shoulders the weight of a family name worth millions. While Charlotte dreamed of sewing dresses, opening a small shop on the corner of Main Street, he had executives whispering about mergers, deals, inheritances. His father was the kind of man who molded his sons to be kings, not to chase a love that didn't fit in the contract. And that day, The day Charlotte waited for him on the platform, Eric chose the throne over his heart. He saw her from afar, holding a small suitcase, trying to smile amid the train smoke. He saw her, but he didn't have the courage to walk up to her. He went back to the black car, took a deep breath, and promised himself he would forget. But forgetting Charlotte was the one thing Eric couldn't buy. He bought everything else. By the time he was 30, I had a penthouse that felt like a palace in the clouds. By the time he was 40, he had amassed so much power that no one dared call him by his first name. It was always Mr. Thompson. And every night, alone on Egyptian cotton sheets, he would replay that morning in his mind, her suitcase, her hopeful look, the note he'd written promising an escape that never happened. His employees knew he had an unpredictable mood. Some said Eric couldn't tolerate mistakes, others swore he got angry at the slightest mention of trains or stations. None of them knew the truth. Behind the contracts signed on marble tables, there was a man who, deep down, was a scared boy who had abandoned the only true love he had the courage to feel. Charlotte, on the other hand, followed a path that would never make it into the business newspapers. She went to work in a small local sewing shop and became the owner of a studio that survived debts, crises, and the absence of someone she believed would be her future. While Eric accumulated land, she accumulated colorful threads and stories to distract herself from her longing. And even after all this time, no amount of women, parties, or fortune could ease the guilt that Eric carried silently. Sometimes at night, he would ask the driver to divert the route and stop in front of the old station, now rusted and almost forgotten. He would stand there, looking at the tracks that had swallowed Charlotte 30 years before, imagining what it would have been like if he had boarded with her. He might not own half the city, but he would have someone to share his breakfast with, something that no $1 million contract could give him. Many thought Eric Thompson was a cold man, shielded from any weakness. What no one saw was the note he kept folded inside his wallet since the day he left it. The same paper yellowed with time, written in a hurry, "Wait for me. I swear I'll be there." 30 years, and he still read those words whenever the fear of running out of time woke him up in the middle of the night. And now, at that very moment, with his knees on the hard floor of the station, his tie out of place and his pride in tatters, Eric was no longer the magazine cover magnate. He was just the man who had finally decided to break his silence. He was just Eric, no last name, no empire, no excuse. Charlotte, just a few steps away from him, was all that still made sense. He was breathing quickly, his gaze fixed on her as if begging for time to have mercy and allow him to rewrite a story that, for so long, he had tried to bury under piles of documents and unbreakable contracts. All around, people held their cell phones, recording every second of that human scandal. But for Eric, nothing mattered more than those eyes that he knew better than any bank account. Eyes that once shone for him, eyes that he destroyed with a cowardly absence. Charlotte remained motionless, holding the bag close to her chest, as if protecting what little was left intact inside her. She was the only one capable of making Eric Thompson tremble, waver, tear the armor he used to rule the world. And now, in front of everyone, that man of steel confessed, with just his gaze, that he was still a prisoner of the love he had abandoned. Charlotte always knew how to sew tears, sew on buttons, and adjust hems. She had been like that since she was a little girl, needle and thread in hand, patience in her soul. While others dreamed of expensive dresses, Charlotte learned to make something beautiful out of the simple. What no one knew was that, even though she had learned to fix everything that was torn, she had never managed to patch the hole Eric left when he didn't show up on that platform. That morning, she believed she had the whole world inside a small suitcase. She had plans to open a dress shop in another city, to embroider dreams together, to hear promises become routine. But the train left, and with it, the part of Charlotte that still believed in promises. She didn't cry in front of anyone. She saved every tear for the silent nights, when longing would come without warning. To her family, Charlotte was strong, hardworking, an example of a woman who didn't need a man to be valuable. To her neighbors, she was the girl who sewed for everyone, charged cheaply, and gave a smile along with the finished pieces. But to herself, she was just a woman who loved once, in the purest and most dangerous way, without a plan B. The years passed and the neighborhood watched Charlotte grow. From a backyard seamstress, she became the owner of a modest studio with colorful lace, antique mannequins, and a display window that made it clear that there was more to it than fabrics. She was careful. Each dress carried a piece of her, each adjustment was a way of showing the world that it was still worth making things last. While Eric built towers, Charlotte built fabric dreams, stitch by stitch. He never complained about life. I never wanted to know if he was happy. Or maybe he did, but I was afraid of the answer. Some friends tried to introduce her to other men. Charlotte smiled and thanked him, but didn't go beyond the coffee. She said that her time had already been given to someone who didn't know how to stay, but who still took her whole heart. And hearts, she said, are not divided. They belonged to Eric, even if he never came back to get them. There were nights when, alone at the sewing table, Charlotte would talk to him in her mind. She would ask if he remembered her when he signed contracts or when he toasted at parties that she only saw in the newspapers. Sometimes she would fold pieces of fabric like someone folding letters that never arrived. And she would smile at no one when, without meaning to, she would smell his perfume mixed with the smell of new thread. To the neighborhood, Charlotte was strong. To herself, she was a survivor of an absence that became a companion. When she needed comfort, she took refuge in the studio. Inside, everything was safe, predictable, needles, threads, patterns. Nothing failed, nothing escaped. Unlike people. Unlike promises. Unlike Eric. And then, as if the universe knew that the silence had gone on for too long, the note arrived. It had no sender, just 2 sentences. Go back to the station. Let the past speak. Charlotte laughed, thinking it was a bad joke. But that handwriting, that way of writing the capital V, was his. His heart raced. He tried to tear the paper, but he couldn't. For 3 nights, he slept with the envelope under his pillow, as if protecting a part of his youth that time had no power to tear away. On the morning of the meeting, Charlotte looked in the mirror. She saw fine lines around her eyes, discreet gray hairs. But deep down, in her brown eyes, there was still the girl who believed in escape, love, the future. She put on an old coat, tied her hair the way he always complimented her, and left without telling anyone. The train seemed slower than she remembered, as if the iron knew she was carrying a heart that couldn't handle running so fast again. And now, standing before Eric Thompson, Charlotte felt everything she had sworn she would never feel again. Fear, anger, the desire to ask why. But stronger than all of that was the silence inside her, guarded as a weapon and a shield. She looked at him on his knees, at the reporters, at the cameras that seemed hungry for scandal. For a second, she wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. But she did nothing. Charlotte knew that everyone there would only see the millionaire on his knees. Only she saw the cowardly boy who ran away from love. Only she saw the tired man who finally got tired of lying to himself. And yet, inside her, something burned like a burning ember in a thin cloth. A part of her wanted to hear him. She wanted to understand if there was still time to sew up what had been torn for 30 years. Charlotte still hasn't said anything. And when she opens her mouth, everyone will understand that a few words can change even the most powerful man in existence. The weight of that silence was so real that it seemed to fill every space between Charlotte and Eric, even there, face to face, after so long. To those watching from afar, it was all just a romantic scandal, a powerful billionaire humiliated by a past love. But only they knew what that moment meant, a scream swallowed for 3 decades. A question that burned in Charlotte's bones every time winter arrived and the memory of the train leaving came back like a nightmare. They were too young to be so sure, and yet old enough to understand the weight of what they were about to do. It was an ordinary Friday, or so it seemed. Charlotte had prepared everything herself. She sold what little she had and bought 2 train tickets to the city he had chosen. 2 tickets were tucked away in a book of poems that she loved to reread when the fear of losing her courage set in. He promised, as soon as the sun rises, I'll be there. Wait for me. We'll disappear from the map, living on little, but with everything that matters. Charlotte believed like someone who puts faith in a miracle. She believed because, for her, Eric was not the tycoon's son, but the boy who stole flowers from the school garden just to see her smile. She believed because she had no reason to doubt. And because love, for her, was too serious a thing to imagine that someone would not go all the way for it. Charlotte arrived early at the station. She was dressed in the simplest of clothes, carrying a wooden suitcase inherited from her grandmother, her heart beating so loudly that she could hear her own blood running. With each passing minute, she repeated the phrase she read every night in his note, "Wait for me." The train whistle sounded like a sentence. Smoke filled the platform. People hugged each other, carried suitcases, hurriedly climbed into the carriages. And Eric? Nothing. No sign. No message delivered by a messenger, no explanation. When the siren announced the final departure, Charlotte climbed up with trembling legs. She chose the emptiest seat, hugged her suitcase to her chest, and watched through the window as the station grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared behind the curve of the track. Right there, she promised herself that she would not cry anymore. And, in a way, she kept her promise. She shed every tear inside her, in the form of silence, work, and nights awake sewing to forget. On the other side of town, that same day, Eric sat across from his father, a man with a stony gaze and hands that knew how to hold power as if it were sand trapped between his fingers. His father didn't need to shout. He just looked at his son as if he were looking at a piece that could still be molded. Don't ruin everything for a youthful whim. Tomorrow, the world will know that you are my heir. A Thompson doesn't run away with seamstresses. Eric tried to protest, tried to say that this wasn't just a teenage romance. He tried to imagine what it would be like to look at his father and say no. But he kept quiet. And when he came to, it was too late. Charlotte was already gone, taking with her the only future he really wanted. Time passed without permission. Eric became the man everyone knows today, powerful, feared, distant. For every deal made, a part of him died of shame. For every champagne popped at luxurious parties, a part of his chest screamed that Charlotte would never know the price of each toast. He could have gone after her, he could have written letters, hired detectives, stopped everything to explain. But he didn't, and that tortured him every day since. Charlotte, for her part, never asked about him. She knew from the newspapers, the headlines, the fortune that was doubling every year. Sometimes she would come across old magazines thrown on park benches. Eric Thompson expands his empire. Overseas. She would turn the page, pretending not to see. Inside her, a voice insisted, he didn't want you. He didn't have the courage. And that was enough to close the doors to any hope of reconciliation. The decades that followed were not made of new loves, parties, escapism. They were made of silence. A dense silence, built on sewing, forced laughter, other people's wedding parties. Charlotte learned to dance alone in the kitchen, to laugh alone in bed, to sleep alone with the certainty that some promises only exist for those who have the courage to keep them. Now, before her, the man who had exchanged an "I love you" for a heavy surname trembled like a child. Charlotte could hear her own heartbeat, strong, alive, restless. And a part of her, which she hated to admit, still wanted to understand. Why had he done that? Why had he never explained? Why now? Why in this place? In the crowd, no one knew the questions that were exploding inside her. No one saw the entire past embodied in a kneeling man and a woman who, even standing, was at the bottom of the pit of her own chest. As he whispered her name, Charlotte took a deep breath to keep from collapsing. It was not yet time to say everything that needed to be said. But it was time to feel everything again. And it is here, where silence speaks louder than any words, that I ask you, strengthen this story now with your like. Be part of this moment, let your presence be felt in this video. And if you are not part of it yet, sign up. This story still has a lot of truth to show. It was on a gray morning, among rolls of fabric and delayed sewing, that Charlotte found the envelope. It was folded, with no return address, almost hidden among piles of clippings and overdue bills. She looked at it as if rereading a ghost, as if facing an old wound that insists on throbbing even after it has healed. For a few seconds, she didn't have the courage to open it. Her heart was beating so hard that she had to sit on the nearest chair, take a deep breath, smell the new thread to keep from giving in to the dizziness that threatened to tear up the solid ground that had taken 3 decades to build. Her hands, calloused from mending other people's clothes, trembled as if they were holding something sacred and dangerous at the same time. When she tore the paper apart, she found only one sentence, short, written in the same crooked handwriting she had never forgotten: "Meet me where it all ended." No date. No time. No signature. But Charlotte didn't need it. There was only one person in the world who would write those words, and who would have the audacity, after so much silence, to ask her to return to the place where everything in her had broken. Her first instinct was to tear up the note, throw it away, shred it like someone who finally crushes the last vestige of a stubborn memory. But she couldn't. She put it in her apron pocket, sewed a hem, served a customer, smiled at a child waiting for her mother. But with every passing minute, the phrase throbbed inside her, "Meet me where it all ended." That night, she couldn't sleep. The note under her pillow seemed to speak to itself, whispering in every silence in the room. Charlotte turned on her side, hugged the sheets, and held back her tears. She wasn't crying because she missed him. She was crying out of anger at herself, because she knew she could still feel that lump in her throat. That part of her, even if tiny, wanted answered. She wanted to hear from his mouth the reason that had always been missing. 3 days passed like this, trying to convince herself that she was crazy, that she didn't need to rummage through a past that was already heavy enough to carry alone. But every time she looked in the mirror, she saw the strong, independent woman, and she also saw, hidden deep down, the girl who had held a suitcase on the empty platform and promised herself that she would never wait for anyone again. That girl was screaming now, saying, "Go. Not for him. Go for yourself." So Charlotte went, without telling anyone. She got up early, tied her hair up like she used to when she was still just a local seamstress, put on her most comfortable shoes, and grabbed a small bag. There wasn't much inside: a handkerchief, an old photo folded so many times that the edges were coming apart, and her ticket. The train left in the middle of the morning. Charlotte looked out the window, recognizing landscapes that she kept in her memory like someone who keeps a scar. You don't see them all the time, but just touching them hurts. Each station she passed was a step down into herself. With each jolt of the carriage, she remembered phrases she had never heard from him. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was scared." Would she hear them now? Would it still matter? A part of her said no, that it was all cheap theater by a man used to having everything he wanted. Another part, more fragile, more cruel, said that perhaps this was the only chance to release this weight that had been weighing on her shoulders for 30 years. When the train announced its arrival, Charlotte held tightly to her bag. She got off slowly, as if she were stepping on sacred and treacherous ground at the same time. The smell of scrap metal, of oil, of damp wind, everything was there, just like the days she waited in vain. Her heart seemed to be out of her chest, beating loudly, disorderly, almost like a teenager again. And that was what irritated her the most. He still had that power. The power to turn her certainties inside out, to make the past invade the present without asking permission. On the platform, there were few faces. An old man with a newspaper, a distracted mother, 2 laughing teenagers. But at the center of it all, there was him, Eric Thompson. Not the untouchable tycoon, not the magazine businessman, but the man who owed her everything. His eyes found hers before she could even take a deep breath. And in that second, before any words, Charlotte knew that anything could happen there: a plea for forgiveness, a new pain, an impossible new beginning, or just another wound to add to the one she already knew how to hide. She didn't move. Neither did he. Only their eyes moved, carrying 3 decades of questions, choked up apologies, unspoken truths. Charlotte felt the weight of the years falling on her shoulders, as if all the sleepless nights had come to sit beside her, waiting for someone to finally say what needed to be said. There, at the same station that held the broken promise, Charlotte took a deep breath, as if she were filling her chest to keep from sinking. And at that moment, those who are here with me, feeling every breath she takes, already understand, this story is not over yet. So be a part of it now, leave your like, show that you still believe in endings that heal what seemed lost, and subscribe, because what Charlotte is about to hear could change everything, and you will be here to listen along. Eric felt the weight of every stare fixed on him like a silent judgment coming from all sides. The wind seemed to whisper ancient secrets, lifting the hem of his coat that he no longer realized was wet with cold sweat. It wasn't the tycoon who was there, kneeling on the icy concrete. It was the boy who once swore to Charlotte a simple world, full of love, and who didn't have the courage to face his father, his family name, the weight of an inheritance. Before him, trembling flowers in his hands, a bouquet that seemed too small for so much emotional debt. He breathed raggedly, as if forcing air to keep from fainting, feeling in his throat the lump of 30 years swallowed dry, day after day. Charlotte, motionless, felt everything at once: the girl in the cheap dress who had held the suitcase, the woman who had built each piece of her life by herself, the seamstress who had learned to mend everything except her heart. Now, with tears in her eyes, she couldn't decide whether to hate or forgive Eric for forcing her to relive every second of that morning, every tightness in her stomach when the train left without him. Her voice, when it finally escaped, was low, scratched by the strength of not giving in to tears. 30 years, Eric. You didn't buy my time, but you can still deserve my gaze. Her words fell like a hammer on his chest. It was as if all the noise around him disappeared, the reporters murmuring, the executives trying to figure out if this was a character flaw or a marketing ploy, the buzz of onlookers filming everything. Nothing mattered. For Eric, there was only Charlotte, and the echo of the truth he had never had the courage to speak. He tried to take her hand, but Charlotte took a step back, just one, enough to remind him that it wouldn't be easy, and he understood. His fingers hung in the air for an awkward moment. His hand, which had been signing billion-dollar contracts with such firmness, now trembled, not knowing where to rest. He lowered his eyes, swallowing his pride for the last time. The pride that, years ago, had weighed more than any love. His voice was hoarse, almost childish in its weakness. I saw you that day. I was there. I wanted to run, to hold you, to tell you to wait one more minute, but I was a coward, Charlotte. I was my father's boy, not the man you needed. I let you go because I thought I could bury it under buildings, under numbers, under people calling me Mr. Thompson. But I didn't. I only dug that hole deeper inside me. Charlotte felt her legs threaten to give out. She clutched her bag to her chest like someone clinging to an anchor in the middle of a storm. Hot tears threatened to betray her strength, to run down the face she had held proudly upright for 3 decades. The station seemed to watch in silence as a love that had never had time to grow, but never completely died, came to an end. Eric continued, not caring if his voice was shaking or if someone was filming every word. I saw every dress you wore in the shop windows when I sent my men to find you. I never stopped watching you from afar, Charlotte. I knew about your studio, the smell of coffee in your living room. I knew about every summer that went by without hearing from you. I knew everything, but I didn't know how to apologize without seeming too small to deserve your presence again. The flowers fell from her hands. He didn't notice. The bouquet rolled slowly across the floor, touching her leg, like a silent plea for forgiveness. Charlotte looked down at that small gesture, felt her throat close up. It wasn't the expensive gift he might have brought. They were simple flowers, alive, fragile, like the love that had withstood the concrete of all those years. The silence stretched like a heavy blanket between them. Neither reporter dared interrupt. The cameras flashed, recording every second that, to Eric, felt like an exposed eternity. Charlotte took a deep breath, deeper than she could remember having taken in years, and inside her, an invisible war raged, between the desire to spit out all her sorrows, to hit him hard on the chest, to ask him why it took him so long, why he left her alone, why he thinks that a few words can mend 3 decades of silence, and the other, silent, treacherous desire to listen more, to understand, to maybe, just maybe, believe in a new way to mend what had once torn so deeply. She reached out, not to touch him, but to gather the flowers he had dropped. Her slender fingers brushed the petals as if testing the delicacy of something she already knows and fears losing again. Eric looked up, his eyes as wet as hers. There, on the platform where it all ended, something pulsed, still nameless, still formless. Something too alive to be buried, too old to pretend it had never existed. And before either of them could say another word, the whistle of a new train cut through the air, reminding them that time doesn't stop for those who are afraid to speak. But for the first time in 30 years, Charlotte didn't want to run away. And Eric, kneeling, felt that, even without knowing the end, he was finally in the right place to start saying what had always been stuck in his throat. The train whistle seemed to expel from within them all the dust accumulated by the 30-year silence. Charlotte held the bouquet of flowers, still half crushed by the fall, as if holding a memory that threatened to slip through her fingers. Eric, kneeling, breathed like a man who had learned to swallow tears, but now no longer cared to hide them. Around him, curious people looked away, some out of embarrassment, others out of respect, but still there were cell phones pointed, recording everything, because no one would believe it later if they didn't see it. The untouchable tycoon, the king of concrete and figures, surrendered at the feet of a love that had always said it didn't need gold to exist. Charlotte lowered her face to his and, in an almost invisible gesture, offered her hand. It took Eric a second to understand that he was supposed to get up, not to hold her forever. He held it anyway, squeezing it slowly, as if confirming that life still gives second chances to those who didn't have the courage to stay the first time. He stood up with her help, his suit wrinkled, his pride even more so, but his eyes, oh, Eric's eyes were freer than ever. She didn't say anything, and she didn't need to. The silence between them screamed truths that words couldn't contain. It wasn't complete forgiveness, it wasn't a new beginning wrapped in a fairy tale promise. It was just a first step out of the concrete that Eric had built to hide his cowardice. He tried to speak, choked, coughed, laughed at himself as if it were possible to laugh at the man who always needed to seem bigger than he was. Charlotte just turned her face toward the street, as if showing the way back to the real world, where hot coffee, wooden tables, and creaking chairs say more than 1,000 cameras and headlines. They left the platform together. The sun was already escaping through the clouds, illuminating their hands that brushed lightly, sometimes meeting, sometimes letting go. It wasn't the walk of a couple in love, it was the walk of two souls who discovered that no matter how much time is lost, some things are kept in drawers that the heart never throws away. The noise of the station was left behind like an echo that fades away until it becomes just a memory. A few meters away, a small cafe, an old acquaintance of Charlotte's, still held the aroma of warm bread mixed with freshly brewed coffee. She pushed open the door, the bell tinkled above their heads, and for a second Eric looked around as if he recognized the world outside the glass-enclosed rooms that had always been his cage. They chose a corner table, away from prying eyes, but they knew that nothing would be completely secret after so much exposure. Still, inside there were only the two of them. Charlotte arranged the flowers on the corner of the table, as if she needed silent witnesses to hold what was yet to come. Eric ordered 2 coffees, but his voice faltered when he said, "For both of us." He smiled awkwardly, massaging his wrist as if trying to hold back an anxiety that money could never cure. When the cup arrived, he didn't even drink it right away, he just watched the smoke rise, as if he could see in it all the years that had spent tearing up his sleepless nights. She didn't speak either. She stared out the fogged-up window at the street, listening to the clink of spoons, the muffled sound of laughter from distant tables. It was such a different sound from the hubbub of the platform, the aggressive questions from reporters, the flashbulbs that burned away truths that had been poorly told. Here, inside that small cafe, Charlotte was just Charlotte, and Eric was just Eric, not Mr. Thompson, not an heir, not a concrete giant. Just a man trying to relearn how to hold time without letting it slip through his fingers. He cleared his throat. "I have no right to ask for anything, I know. But can I stay here, close to you, just listening? I need to hear your voice. I need to remember what it was like to be myself when only you could truly see me." Charlotte didn't respond with words, she just sighed. She plunged her gaze into the cooling cup, as if she were diving deep inside herself to see if she still had the strength to forgive. The conversation that followed was not a confession from a soap opera. There were pauses, shy laughter, silences longer than sentences, memories carefully sewn together, as if afraid of pulling a thread and tearing everything apart again. To someone looking from the outside, they were just 2 acquaintances killing time. But those who looked closely would see the silent miracle of a love that did not die. It simply fell asleep, waiting for the right moment to open its eyes without rushing to promise a future. And if someone were to ask them later what they decided there, Charlotte would answer in the simplest way: they didn't decide anything. They didn't swear anything. They simply chose to walk side by side out of the cafe, without contracts, without alliances, without guarantee. And sometimes, time doesn't erase things. It only teaches you to wait for the right moment. Charlotte held the still warm cup between her hands, as if the warmth of the coffee were the last shield between what was left of her pain and what was being born again inside her chest. Eric, on the other side, didn't dare to interrupt the silence. He watched her every gesture, like a boy waiting for the final grade after a life of poorly done tests. The coffee was already getting cold, the street outside continued indifferently, but in that moment, everything was about the two of them, about what they were, what they lost, what they could still be. When Charlotte looked up, her eyes were red but firm. There was no more room for pride, nor for the resentment that only echoed. She took a deep breath, as if she needed to summon courage straight from the depths of her soul. And then she said, her voice calm, but strong enough to change the course of everything that was left of them, "Eric, I spent half my life hoping to forget you, and the other half pretending I could. But I got tired of fighting what never died. I'm not that girl on the platform anymore. I'm woman enough to forgive the cowardly boy you were. And strong enough to give you one last chance to prove that you know how to be the man I always knew was inside you." She held out her hand across the table, her fingers inviting, mature, without the youthful rush of before. Eric swallowed his tears, holding her hand as if he were holding the key to a door he swore he had locked forever. A tired, genuine smile appeared on his lips, a smile that neither money, nor contracts, nor fame had been able to buy all these years. Outside, the wind whistled through the trees, almost in tune with the new silence that no longer hurt. It was a silence of promise, not the foolish promise of youth, but the silence of two adults who understand that love, to last, doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be real. It has to be a choice. And there, at that coffee-stained table, Charlotte was choosing Eric once again. But this time, the right way, no running away, no rushing, no fear. She squeezed his hand one last time before saying a phrase that would remain forever engraved in both of their hearts, and in the memory of those who believed together until the end. "Life has taught me that you can't sew the past, but you can embroider the present with courage. I'll give you my hand, Eric. The rest, we'll build slowly." There, among breadcrumbs and empty cups, two new versions of themselves were born. Charlotte, owner of a love that is now a choice, not destiny. Eric, owner of a forgiveness that not all the zeros in the bank account could buy. Together, they left the cafe hand in hand, ready to walk without maps, without promises of a happy ending written in stone, but with the certainty that time, sometimes, does not erase, it only matures the heart to receive the right love at the right time. This story ends here, but the lessons remain. To love is to have the courage to start over. To forgive is to free oneself from the weight that the past carries. And to believe, even after so many falls, is what makes life worth every breath. If this reunion touched your heart, leave a like now. Comment on what touched you the most and share it with those who need to believe that true love can sleep, but it always wakes up. And don't leave, subscribe to walk with us through other stories that prove that, where there is truth, love always finds a way. The excitement doesn't stop there. A click on the heart, a gesture on the subscribe button, and each turn finds you again, hand in hand with truths that warm the soul. Stories like these deserve to be lived together until the last breath of each reunion.